For nearly 60 years, the loudest, wildest, most notorious rock and roll band in history was held together by its quietest man. While Mick Jagger strutted and Keith Richards raised chaos, one man sat calmly behind the drums in a perfectly tailored suit, keeping perfect time, saying almost nothing, and never once behaving like a rock star. His name was Charlie Watts. He was the beating heart of the Rolling Stones. Not the face, not the voice, not the swagger, the pulse, the steady, swinging, unshakable rhythm underneath everything. And yet, he was the last person on earth who wanted the spotlight. He would have been perfectly happy if you never noticed him at all, because Charlie Watts did not really want to be a rock star. He wanted to play jazz. He famously called his 6 decades in the biggest band in the world his day job, the thing he did so that he could afford to do the thing he truly loved. In a world of excess, he was a picture of elegance and restraint. Married to one woman for 57 years, dressed like an English gentleman, quietly collecting rare books and breeding horses while his bandmates made headlines. The most stylish man in rock and the least interested in acting like it. When he died on this day in 2021 at the age of 80, the tributes were staggering. Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, Elton John, drummers and legends the world over. Not because he was flashy, because he was, as so many said, simply the best and the most beloved. How does the quietest man in the room end up being the one who holds everything together? Charlie Watts left us on this day, in 2021. This is the story of the steady heart of the Rolling Stones. Charles Robert Watts was born in London on June 2, 1941, in the middle of the war, and grew up in a modest neighborhood in the city's northwest. He was a quiet, tidy, artistic boy, and from a young age, he fell completely in love with one thing: jazz. He did not dream of stadiums. He dreamed of smoky jazz clubs and the swing of a great drummer. As a teenager, he reportedly took a banjo apart and reshaped it into a makeshift drum kit, just to play along to the records he adored. Jazz was his first love, and it would remain his truest one for the rest of his life. But he was practical too. He trained as a graphic artist at Harrow School of Art and took a real job at a London advertising agency. Drumming, at first, was something he did in the evenings, a passion, not a plan. He was a working man with a steady profession and a quiet dream. Then, in the early 60s, he began playing with Blues Incorporated, a band at the very center of London's booming blues scene. And there he met a group of scruffy, ambitious young men who were desperate to hire him. A singer named Mick Jagger, a guitarist named Keith Richards, and their friend Brian Jones. There was just one problem: they could barely afford him. Charlie had a real salary and real gigs. This unknown little band could not even cover his modest fee. For a while, the man who would become one of the most famous drummers alive hesitated to join what would become the most famous band on earth. A steady job, a love of jazz, and a scruffy little blues band that couldn't afford him. If you were Charlie Watts in 1962, would you have taken the leap? What do you think finally made him say yes? He said yes. In January 1963, Charlie Watts became a Rolling Stone, and everything changed, for him and for music. What he brought to the band was something you cannot fake and cannot teach: a feel, a swing, a rhythm that came straight out of jazz and gave the Stones a groove no other rock band had. Listen to any Rolling Stones song you love, and Charlie is the reason it moves the way it does. Keith Richards said it best: nothing happened in the studio until Charlie found the rhythm. Once he and Keith locked together, the magic began. He was, quite literally, the engine of the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And his style was unmistakable. Not because it was showy, but because it never was. No giant drum solos, no theatrics. Just exactly what the song needed. played with total authority. "He played exactly what was needed," said Joan Jett. "No more, no less." In an era of drummers trying to be heard, Charlie's genius was restraint. He appeared on all 26 of the band's studio albums. He drove them through the blues years, the psychedelic years, the disco-tinged 70s, and every triumphant stadium tour after. Through every reinvention, every scandal, every decade, the one constant was Charlie, sitting calmly at the back, keeping perfect time. Yet he never grew to love the spectacle. He once described his life on tour, with characteristic dry wit, as 4 decades of seeing Mick's bum running around in front of me. He did the job magnificently, night after night, for a crowd of 100,000, and then longed for the intimacy of a small jazz room. He was the engine of a band he never fully wanted to be the star of. What does it take to give something your absolute best for 60 years, while quietly dreaming of a different stage entirely? Off the stage, Charlie Watts broke every rule of rock and roll by being decent. In 1964, he married Shirley, and he stayed devoted to her for 57 years until the end of his life. While the Stones were the poster boys of excess, Charlie went home to his wife. He credited it with a smile to not really being a rock star. He was famous for his elegance. Consistently named among the best-dressed men in the world, he wore beautifully tailored Savile Row suits when his bandmates wore feathers and scarves. There is a beloved story that captures him perfectly. When an intoxicated Jagger once phoned his room and called him "my drummer," Charlie calmly got dressed in a full suit, walked over and reminded him exactly who worked for whom. "Don't ever call me your drummer again," he said. "You're my singer." It was the only time the famously gentle Charlie ever lost his composure, and even then, he did it in a perfectly pressed suit and polished shoes. Dignity, always. That was Charlie, but he was human, and even the steadiest heart can waver. In the mid-1980s, feeling adrift, Charlie briefly lost his way to drink and drugs. The one dark stretch in an otherwise grounded life. It frightened him. It nearly cost him the marriage and the peace that mattered most to him. And so he did the quietest, most Charlie thing imaginable. He simply stopped. With Shirley beside him, he pulled himself back, returned to the calm, faithful man he had always been, and never looked back. No drama, no spectacle, just a good man quietly finding his way home again. In a world that rewards the loudest voice, Charlie Watts proved you could be the coolest man in rock by being the most grounded. Why do you think that quiet steadiness made people love him even more? Through it all, jazz remained his true north. Whenever the Stones paused, Charlie returned to his first love, leading his own jazz orchestra, his quintet, playing the small, smoky rooms he had dreamed of as a boy. On those stages, close to the other players, he was purely, quietly happy. It was where he belonged. He kept the beat for the Stones into his late 70s. Through the Steel Wheels tour, the Super Bowl, 1 million people on Copacabana Beach, always immaculate, always understated, always exactly on time. A living reminder that you do not have to shout to be the most important person in the room. In August 2021, for the first time in his life, Charlie stepped back, withdrawing from an upcoming tour to recover from a medical procedure. And on the 24th of August, surrounded by his family, Charlie Watts passed away peacefully in a London hospital. He was 80 years old. The tributes came like a flood. Paul McCartney called him steady as a rock. Elton John called him the ultimate drummer, the most stylish of men. Ringo Starr sent peace and love. And Mick Jagger, the singer, simply shared a photo of his friend, smiling. 60 years of brotherhood in a single quiet image. The Rolling Stones play on, but there will only ever be one Charlie Watts, the jazz man who took a day job with a rock band and quietly became one of the greatest, most beloved drummers who ever lived. Proof that character is its own kind of genius and that the quiet ones are often holding everything together. Charlie Watts left us on this day in 2021. The quiet stone, the steady heart, the most elegant man in the loudest band on earth. Here's to the quiet ones who keep perfect time while everyone else takes the spotlight. Rest easy, Charlie Watts. Thank you for the rhythm. Subscribe. We do this every day.